Sanbonani, Dumelang. My name is Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. Welcome to the African Renaissance podcast. In this installation, we've got the head of the South African Institute of Race Relations, Dr. John Endres. Welcome to the podcast, African Renaissance podcast, and thanks for creating time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And maybe just as the first things first, many of us are not very much exposed to what is an institution that has been around for majority of the space we call South Africa. What is the IRR? How long has it been around? What is its project?
Yeah, so to give it its full name, it is the South African Institute of Race Relations. And it's a very old think tank that was established as long back as 1929. And what happened at that time was that a few years previously, people across the country had started noticing that there was a problem with race relations. This was well before the introduction of apartheid, which was only from 1948. But people could see that problems were beginning. And what they did in those years preceding 1929 is they started creating something called joint councils in different parts of the country. And a joint council would be a group of people who would get together to meet and to talk about what was going on in their area in terms of race relations and economic development and social development and so on. And out of those joint councils, eventually the Institute of Race Relations was founded in 1929. And it really was an initiative of academics and church people and concerned citizens, journalists as well. Also of different races. So it was not a purely white phenomenon. It was people of different races saying, we've got to figure out what's going on in this country. And the work was formalized over time, more and more. And it was always very much evidence-based and evidence-focused. And so one of the most famous products of the Institute of Race Relations is something called the South Africa Survey, which is a book of almost 1,000 pages in length, with pure statistics about South Africa. So it has all the economic statistics, the education numbers, the health numbers, the trade numbers, the demography, whatever you can think of is in that book. And it gets published every year and updated every year. And that means that since 1948, which was when the first annual edition came out, the Institute has been collecting these numbers every single year and publishing them in order to describe what South Africa looks like at a given moment in time, and how it is developing and advancing and progressing.
And it seems to me, I mean, one of the big names was Jabavu at the founding of, and Jabavu is a significant figure in the anti-apartheid and struggle and the liberation movement in general, including his father. But that means the IRR was anti-establishment. Can you unpack that for me, particularly at that time under apartheid, some of the moments which demonstrate that it not only was anti-establishment, but that from time to time the establishment felt its pressure and did a thing or two?
Yeah, and so I think to explain that, I must start by saying that the Institute was inspired since the beginning by the philosophy of classical liberalism. And one of the tenets of classical liberalism is that you must treat people as individuals and not as collectives. So for me to know what kind of a person you are, I should not be making assumptions based on the color of your skin. I need to meet you as a person, understand you as a person, and then I can form an opinion about you. And if you apply this principle more broadly to a country, a state, a nation, a city, what you say is that you can't really treat people differently based on their race as collectives. That's not the correct approach. It's not a good way to do things. You need to treat people equally no matter what race they are.
Can you treat them differently if they're children?
Some slightly different rules apply to that, yes, of course.
Can you treat them differently if they are women?
No, you treat all adults the same, effectively. But of course, what you're alluding to there is that in those times, there were people who thought that black people were like children, right? And they would say, for this reason, white people should be in charge, because black people don't have the capacity, to do whatever happens in society or in the economy. And that is part of the reason why we got policies like apartheid coming out of that. And that is where the people in the Institute of Race Relations felt very uncomfortable with that. And they said, this is not a good way to do things. Black people, when they're not children, are adults. They should be treated like adults. And that, of course, ran very much against the grain of the dominant philosophy at the time in the white community especially. We would say, okay, you need segregation and whites should be in a superior place in society. They need to run affairs, run the government, etc., etc. And that did mean that the Institute was unpopular during those times. And one example of that would have been the Schlebusch Commission, which was in the, I think, late 1970s, which was looking into the affairs of organizations that were counter-establishment like the Institute of Race Relations. And in that case, the Institute was able to continue its work, but it was certainly in the targeting sites of the government. There was an organization set up at the time called the South African Bureau for Racial Affairs, or SABRA. And this was effectively the government's attempt to create an IRR that was aligned with the government. But of course, it didn't have credibility because it was not independent.
So it was a force of the anti-apartheid movement. It was a force of, we have to do away with the apartheid establishment.
Yes.
Would I be correct to say this was a think tank whose very principles were, there must be a day that arrives in which apartheid falls and is eliminated completely?
Yes, and what was also, I think, quite interesting about the analysis of the Institute was that it had long held the position that racial discrimination was inappropriate and should not be taking place. But over time, it also developed the argument, which I think was correct, that economically, this form of racial segregation was very harmful. It was an economically stupid idea. And that as a result of this economic bad decision, apartheid was going to collapse eventually because it could not economically sustain itself. And the notion is very simple, right? You say every human being has the potential to help build an economy. And you want to make the use of all the people in the country to help build that economy, make it as successful as possible for everybody who lives in that country. But if you are choosing a policy like apartheid, where you say, we just want 15% of the population to be running the economy, we'll keep the other 80% out of it because we don't trust them or whatever the reason might be, you are hurting yourself. And I think this is an underappreciated fact about apartheid, which is much as it hurt black people, it also hurt white people by restricting the ability of the economy to be far more successful than it would have been if everybody would have been able to collaborate.
I want to fast track to some of the interesting observations that have been coming out of the institution. But maybe before we go there, just a quick conversation about what you consider apartheid to have been. You've started already by saying it was harmful to the white population too. It's not a very popular thing to say. I mean, most people can't quite identify with that. How would you substantiate apartheid being bad for black people and being bad for white people?
Okay, so I'll start with the last part of your question first, and that is to identify I think the core evil at the heart of apartheid. As liberals, the root origin of the word liberal comes from Latin and means free. So we care a lot about freedom. And what apartheid did was to steal freedom from people. It prevented black people and white people from marrying. It prevented them from choosing where to live in the country. It limited the professions that black people were able to exercise. It limited political activity. So it restricted all these freedoms, and that is actually the core problem with apartheid, was that it limited freedom of people. As a consequence of that, it also limited dignity of people, and that is a sort of a downstream bad effect of apartheid, and that needed to be overcome. And that is also to say that with the 1994 transition, in my view, the biggest gain that the country got out of that was to gain its freedom. So to call it the liberation struggle is exactly the right word. It was a liberation from a system.
There is this subject of freedom specifically. There is a victim in this. There is the unfree, the marginalized, the subaltern. And since there's a subaltern, there are oppressors. And there is a benefit to the relationship and the condition of the subaltern to a specific group. So whose freedom is specifically being addressed when apartheid falls?
So I have to rewind a little bit to an earlier question of yours, which was that I made this very counterintuitive statement where I said that apartheid hurt not only black people, which is obvious, but also white people. And that is, that's not an obvious thing to say.
Yeah.
And the way the argument works here is that it compares what sort of the status of white people in South Africa compared to what it might have been.
You're making them victims of apartheid.
In a way they were, but they were doing it to themselves, right? So, because they introduced the system.
In the 1920s, there is a huge problem of the sort of it's called white poor problem.
Yes, that's right.
And it's the context in which this institution gets formed. It's actually a big international conversation.
Yeah.
There are Harvard papers that come out to describe how actually the white settler population in South Africa, specifically Afrikaners, had been trapped. And Hannah Arendt even describes it later on in The Origins of Totalitarianism as they were a very strange colonial group because the rest of the world, when they did colonize, had massive industrializations. They sort of retreated, and the only difference between the ways in which they were living and the ways in which the Bantus were living was the color of their skin. But in the 1920s, during massive, when industrialization was really taking place, there's this problem called poor white problem.
Yeah.
The Rand Revolt of 1922 is a sort of tipping point of that, where white workers, specifically miners, say, you need to protect our jobs.
Yes.
And the government concedes to that. Apartheid consolidates that.
Yes.
By 1960, that problem of the white poor problem had been completely eliminated by apartheid.
Yes. Mostly, yes.
I can't call that victimhood.
No, that's not the area in which I'm identifying the victimhood.
Okay.
So think of GDP per capita amongst white people. I don't know what the exact number is, but by 1989, to give it a number, $1,000 per person. And that was certainly much higher than GDP per capita for black people was. So that's no question. But if South Africa had not had the policy of apartheid and had included all of its population in being economically active and building a successful country, then the GDP per capita of white people might have been $2,000 instead of $1,000. And that is the gap that I'm identifying, where I'm saying, this was a stupid policy because much as it was designed to benefit white people, and it did benefit white people, they could have had much better lives if they'd not had this policy.
Okay, I'm not a victim in that sense. Then the concept of victimhood has just been definitionally undermined, because if you're saying my benefit was 50%, it could have been 100%.
Yes.
You're just describing the extent to which my privilege would have been better.
Well,
not that I robbed myself of a specific human condition. I mean,
you certainly did that.
Apartheid for black people was a certain crime against their humanity, and that's the victimhood with which we are speaking about. It's like if I say, that would be a crude example, but certainly you can't use the concept of victimhood here, that white people are victims of apartheid.
Well, I'm sort of setting you up, right? Because I'm going to compare BEE to apartheid.
Well, that would be a great. Let's fast track then. Keep the apartheid concept in mind.
Yes.
And because maybe in the framework of your Harvard speech, where you describe the current conditions over the last 30 years. I mean, in my view, from certainly my political background, we normally don't acknowledge the things you were acknowledging there. I grew all my life under this democracy. I was in primary school, I was in high school, I went to university, and I'm sitting here. Majority of my life was lived in this. And I feel like things haven't changed since, 1994. But you gave an interesting talk where you divided this 1994 to 2004 into 3 ages. Can you just, for the benefit of all of us, take us through those in a summary way and the key points of those ages? Maybe then we can return to your victimhood.
It kind of, I do not consider myself a victim by any stretch of the imagination. But so the analogy I was trying to draw is that Could one say that BEE beneficiaries are victims? Right? And the obvious answer is no, because they are benefiting from a system, it's designed to help them and advance them.
Are the beneficiaries of reparations for victims of the Holocaust, are they not? How would you balance that logic?
No, so the point I would make here is that BEE beneficiaries are better off than they would have been without BEE. That's the argument at the heart of BEE.
Yeah, making
what I'm saying.
Give me the ages.
Yes, okay. I'll give you the ages.
Then we can cut to these.
Okay. To
nodal points.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good. Okay, the ages story works like this. So if you look at South Africa's history from 1994 to the present, you can see that there's like two very distinct types of periods in that time span. And that first period is from about 1994 to 2007, 2008. And the second period is from about 2008, round about to the present, which is the second age. And looking at the statistics, those two periods look very, very distinct. And to give you one example, the economic growth rate in the first age was 3.6% on average from 1994 to 2007. In the second age, that drops down to about 1%. So it's like less than a third of what it had been before. When you look at the public debt, for example, the ANC government inherited a debt from the apartheid government that was 50% of GDP. It did not repudiate that debt and say, that was not our fault, we're not going to pay it. They said, we're going to take that on. We accept responsibility because our government is, it's the successor government to the previous government. They accept the debt and they pay it down to 25% of GDP. So they halve the public debt effectively in 13 years, which is very impressive. That's like an impressive feat of macroeconomic management. But from 2008 to the present, the debt triples from 25% of GDP to 75%, depending on how you calculate it, over 80% of GDP. When you look at the number of jobs created during that first period, the number of people with jobs almost doubled. And in the second period, we add under 1 million jobs for the entire 15-year period. And so what that means is that in the first period, life was actually getting better on average for people. More people had jobs, public services were being rolled out, the public finances were being responsibly managed, jobs were being created. But during the second period, that stopped effectively. The economy wasn't growing anymore, it wasn't creating jobs anymore. The unemployment rate kept going up, the public debt was going up, and the outcomes were not good for the country. And that brings us to this point where we are today, where it looks like we're going to enter a third age. And the question is, what does that look like? And that's what we're thinking about very hard at the Institute, trying to figure out where's our country going next.
The first age, one of the points you make is around human settlement, the massive rollout of what are called RDP houses.
Yeah.
And you seem to say, for instance, a sheikh, of course, it's a terrible, terrible place to live in. An RDP, by a stretch, it's better. It was not the best RDP, but it's better.
Yeah.
But can you just go through, other than the sort of RDP programs of infrastructure, what else, from an infrastructure point of view, because the people of the second age who have a spirited defense of the second age like to point to the infrastructure expenditures of that period of 2009, maybe say 2018, 2019.
Exactly. And I mean, like, those dates are somewhat arbitrarily chosen. Like, you could be a year out this way or that way.
Yeah.
So let's not get hung up on those year numbers. But certainly that's true. In that first age, the rollout of access to public services to black people who'd been deprived of those services during apartheid was very notable. And that included housing, as you've mentioned, but it also included electricity, for example. It included water. It included, roads and transport. In all of these areas, a lot more access was being given in parts of the country that didn't have access to these services before. And I think that was recognized by the recipients as well. So if you look at the ANC's 2004 election result, that was incredible.
Yeah.
That was 69.7%.
And it had the highest voter turnout since.
Yeah. And in the first election of 1994, Nelson Mandela was the candidate. And it's hard to imagine a more charismatic, personality. But Thabo Mbeki in 2004, exceeded the vote share which Nelson Mandela himself got in 1994. And why? Like, how could Thabo Mbeki get more votes than Nelson Mandela? And the reason is because the government was actually performing pretty well. You know, those services were being rolled out. People were getting electricity, water, houses, access to education, access to healthcare.
So you are arguing, even by measure of infrastructure delivery,
Yes.
that age remains better than the age after?
Yes. So, I mean, it's a slightly tricky thing to express, because it becomes exponentially more difficult to close the gap to reach 100% of coverage of something. When you are very close to 100%, it's a lot more effort, right? So if only 50% of the population have access to a service, lifting that up to 80% is relatively easy. Then getting the next 10% is a lot harder, and the last 10% is very hard. So those numbers haven't really shifted much in the last 15, 20 years. But part of the reason for that is because it's so much harder to close that final gap. But I would say that what was created during that first age was also a sense of expectation, I think, on the part of people who said, okay, great, you know, the government is moving, I've finally got a house.
What do you bet was right about that age? It's an age you seem to be giving a lot of credit. If I'm not wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
There's something that was right that was happening. What was it?
Well, that's like really the key question, because a possible explanation is it had nothing to do with us, and it was just the rest of the world, right? So a possible explanation is South Africa is a pariah state up until 1994. Then after 1994, it's attractive for investment again, and companies start coming in, and people are interested, there's investment happening. And so jobs are created, and sort of, you know, things work out because we got lucky, effectively. I do think it's more than that. You know, I do think that we also played a role in that. Our government, the Mandela government, the two Mbeki administrations did play a role in that. And I think a large part of that was sort of a relatively high degree of acceptance, I think, of the principles of free markets that at the time seemed to have won the ideological battle in the world because of the fall of communism, you know, in the early 1990s. I think the ANC prior to that had been far more socialistically oriented than it was after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union, for example. And I think as a result of that, it adopted policies that were a lot more market-friendly than they might have been had that not happened. And that means that the fiscal management, monetary management of the economy was a lot more responsible. I think that the Mbeki administration was also very worried about getting into a state of dependency to foreign financiers or, you know, global financial institutions needing bailouts.
Including pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, for example.
Which was at the core of the battle around the rolling out of ARVs, for an example.
Yes.
The dependency question.
Yes.
Go on. I think I don't want to interrupt that flow, because maybe you want to conclude it by also adding what you think was wrong about the age after.
Yeah, and I think this is a point that's easily missed, because there's a very simplistic explanation, which goes like this. Up until 2007, everything was fine. Then two things happened. The one was the global financial crisis.
2008.
Yeah. And the second was the presidency of Jacob Zuma. And those two things in combination sort of, you know, killed our growth. And since then, we've been stagnating or even going backwards in terms of incomes. And that is partly true. So looking at the global financial crisis, certainly our GDP growth took a deep dip in 2008, as it did in most countries in the world. But when you look at other countries, you'll see that after that dip, growth continues along the same line as before. They continue getting richer. In South Africa, it doesn't, right? So we've got our growth line going up like this until 2008. And from 2008, it just levels out and gets flat. And as a result of this, we are falling behind the rest of the world. If you look at GDP per capita as a measure, in 1994, South Africa's GDP per capita compared to the world average was 1-to-1. So South Africans were earning the same GDP per capita as anybody in the average of the rest of the world. By 2007, 2008, it was still 1-to-1. But today it is 77%. And that means we've got a lot poorer compared to the rest of the world. And the reason for that is because our growth line is flat and the growth line of other countries is still going up. And that's one of the big problems.
Except your first explanation wants to attribute this to liberalism.
to attribute...
It's the same ANC as far as I'm concerned. I mean, especially majority of Zuma's years, there isn't much policy departure on any front.
Yes. So now we have to cover a few more factors.
So let's go to the first explanation that, and I think there you will be very happy to say completely the thoughts you were on earlier about socialism and all of that. But a key thing here is this is the best days of BEE. The best BEE deals are in the first age. That's the first thing. The second thing, it is a very big state. It is a state that is not retreating from running the country. It has a big public service. It is very much involved in directing the economy. It's running very big parastatals and is running them in a healthy way, from Transnet to Eskom to SAA. It is a monopoly in most of those industries. It is a state that in no way could be characterized as free market or even classical liberal economic policy praxis. And again, I ask, why would you do anything else except begin by giving credit, maybe, to the fact of the rightness, so to speak, of that policy praxis?
The reason I would do that is because I think that many of those policies started to be introduced during that period, but the negative consequences only started to be felt several years afterwards. And, during that period, cadre deployment started, for example. I think that was at the Mayuking conference in 1997 that the ANC first floated that idea. On the face of it, it makes sense, right? You're sort of inheriting a state where you can't trust the administration, and you say, we've got to get our own people into positions of authority because we don't know if those Afrikaners are going to follow our instructions, right? So on the face of it, makes sense. The purpose of cadre deployment, as I understand it, was to make sure that the ANC had control of the institutions of state and as a consequence of the state itself. But the ironic consequence of it has been, I think, that it has weakened the control of the ANC over the state for the reason that the underperformance has been so great. So instead of making the ANC more powerful and controlling everything, it's all falling apart between their hands at the moment. And that's sort of a counterintuitive consequence of that policy. I would mention a few policies. So we have BEE, I think, starting during that period. Employment equity. We've got the National Water Act, which basically nationalizes water in South Africa. We've got the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, I think 2002, implemented in 2004, which effectively nationalizes the mineral resources of the country. All of these things have consequences that unfold over time. And I think that President Mbeki got a little bit lucky in the sense that the negative consequences of these policies were introduced in their early form during his presidency, but the effects only started unfolding during the Zuma presidency. And to come back to an earlier idea, the second cause to which our underdevelopment is attributed is the Zuma presidency. And typically what people then say is that the corruption killed our growth. And again, that is partly true, but I think it misses the other part of the explanation, which was the combination of these policies that were introduced in the early 2000s, beginning to be implemented in a sort of more structured way into the 2010s, and unfolding that effect of constricting the economy.
Many people would say that's a leadership problem, that's not a policy problem. That's, on the one hand, a guy that will implement a policy efficiently to the best of its own objectives, and a guy that either is corrupt or is a bad leader and implements the same good policy in a terrible way. And we could pick up examples in the world of classical free market neoliberal, let's use that term, neoliberal options. They work somewhere, they don't work somewhere. Why can't the explanation not be, this is just a question of leadership? Because it's the only variable.
I would dispute that it's the only variable. I think it's a very important variable, and I think it explains a lot of where we find ourselves today is a question of leadership. But in South Africa, we also tend to personalize politics, I think maybe too much. And it's actually the rules of the game that matter more than the people running the game. and adherence to the rules. And so I think if you introduce bad rules and people adhere closely to them, you get bad results as a consequence of that.
I'll give you an example, John. You run the IRR. You recruit. You see talent, you go recruit it. It's not a bad thing.
Yes.
Or you put people on bursaries. One of the best things about you funded Mandela, for an example, is your student.
Yes.
And when you then get some of these students that you had funded, some of them are stars, you go recruit them to come work, but you are prioritizing meritocracy.
Yes.
But a policy like that can be bad, can be terrible in the hands of a crook. You know, they will use that. No, John also used to recruit. John, went to get, and they just put their family members. Yeah, and they don't prioritize.
But then it's not meritocracy, right?
But I'm saying in the hands of a proper person, meritocracy is the point. You are looking for meritocracy. You are hunting for a meritocracy. But you're given this flexibility in a sense that you're just not opening it up. You recruit actively that I have to go out there and find the people who are aligned to my vision, but who've got the proper credentials, who've got merit, proper skills, and all of that.
Yeah.
The variable there that I'm trying to point out to is leadership.
Yeah, so I mean, like, leadership is such an interesting question because, I did my PhD research on change management in cities, and it was so much work. It was years and years of work. And in the end, the conclusion was a very simple one, which was, maybe in a way a bit disappointing. Because in change management, you read the entire literature, and what they always have is like a sort of a stepwise model. And they'll say, you need to follow the following 3 steps that I'm going to tell you, and then your change project is going to be great. Or 7 steps, or 5 steps, or 6 steps, or whatever it is. And my research showed that doesn't actually matter that much. But what matters is the leadership in the place, in the organization that's being run.
And leadership as a collective, maybe not so much an individual?
It's a combination, but sort of to define what I mean by leadership, or the key essence that makes it successful, is the ability to give a group of people an understanding of why they are doing what they are doing. That's all it is. And that was what the really successful cities that I studied had. They would have a mayor or city manager or an executive team, so it could be a group of people as well, who were able to convey to the city employees why they were doing what they were doing. And once people had that feeling, then they were able to implement change with very smoothly and very rapidly, whereas other cities struggled because people feel threatened by change. They say, I've sort of got my corner of my way of doing things. I don't want to be disturbed in that. When you change things around, people get stressed about it. But if they know what the point is, then they don't get so stressed. And that is currently something that's lacking in South Africa in terms of national leadership. Where do we see ourselves as a country? Where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And I'm not seeing that coming out of the political system, and that worries me. Because if you don't know where you're going and you haven't got somebody who's able to paint that vision and inspire that vision in people, then why would people...
What I find interesting is drawing a straight line between that 2008 age, and I'll come to that in a moment, and the GNU or Ramaphosa. The liberal quarters were very excited about Ramaphosa's coming into play. I don't know why, but...
I agree. No, I also don't know why.
There was some excitement, I don't know, with every single detail of his participation in business, his public life. When he got elected as the president, the idea that he was going to be this corruption buster on the one hand, and on the other, he had a much more, this thing that you're describing, the capacity to hold a unit together and think collectively and all of that. But my question is, this straight line that you draw, you seem to also include the very first or early days of GNU. Is that a correct reading or not?
It kind of is.
So GNU is part of the second age?
I would say it's sort of the start of the third age.
Start?
Yes.
What is different about it, except the DA?
Well, what's different about it is the 2024 election results, which I think are sort of a watershed moment in South African history.
Agreed.
Because we have the 30-year of ANC dominance from 1994 to 2024, and now we don't have that anymore. And so we're entering a new time, and we don't know what that time is going to look like yet. We've got the GNU, but we all feel uncertain about it because, like, what is actually going on, and where are we going? And again, coming back to change management, one of the most useful models was developed by a German sociologist called Kurt Lewin, who left Germany because of the Nazis, went to the United States and built his career there, who in 1947 developed a model where he said, if you're going to change a social entity like a group of people or a family or something, typically what you're going to do is that you're going to do an unfreeze, which is you've got your existing state, you've got to unfreeze that first, then you do a move, and then you do a refreeze. And what that means is that you've got a stable state that you start with, then you've got a period of flux when things are moving around, and then you've got a new stable state. And we are currently in that period of flux right there. Right? So we've unfrozen through the 2024 election. Now our politics is sort of breaking open and lots of things become possible. And it's nerve-wracking because you don't know where things are heading. Right? It makes you feel very uncertain. But this is going to play out in some way. And
Let me put it differently. Where should things head?
Well, I have a very clear view on that.
Yeah.
So, for the country, my greatest frustration is that in South Africa, we've lost our sense of ambition, a sense of, I think, deserved exceptionalism, which we can earn for ourselves.
Exceptional from who?
On the African continent.
You think we're exceptional?
Yeah, I do think so. In terms of our infrastructure, our degree of industrialization, the diversity of the population, the history, I think we're a special country. I do think we are. Also with huge potential. And what frustrates me is how far we are below that potential. South Africa should be shooting the lights out. We've got like the most amazing resources in everything, from natural resources to people, to ideas, to communities, like everything is here. But we're not reaching our potential. And we're satisfied with that, right? So we think having half the population on social grants is fine. It's okay. That's like the best we can do. Or our income's not rising is fine. Our unemployment rate going up is fine. And we accept that. And that is devastating. And that is, if there's one thing that I most want to change in South Africa, it's that. I want us to become ambitious as a country and to say we're not...
Let's say we agree. Those are the problems.
Yes.
If you were to begin to outline how to get out of them,
Yeah.
to this future where there's no rising levels of unemployment, where our income levels improve, where we sort of marshal the strength of our exceptionalism, as you put it,
Yes.
into a sustainable developmental path. What must happen?
Okay, what must happen? So I'll start at quite a philosophical level, if I may.
Yeah.
Which is that there's the saying that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the notion here is that, if somebody gives you lunch...
I didn't know there was a philosophical notion.
So,
I thought you were going to go very Aristotelian on me, or Socratic.
No, I'm going...
There's no such a thing as a free lunch.
Yes.
What a philosophy.
I'm going towards the culinary route.
Okay,
Talking about lunch already. So what that
sounds like something Matlala would say.
Yes, it might.
Something he would say to a minister that, Chief, we're going to give you money to become something,
yes,
but there's no free lunch.
Yes. I mean, exactly. So it's a nice little saying. Basically what it means is that for you to get something without paying for it, somebody else has to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And that's true of most things. Like there's nothing that's for free. Somebody has to pay for everything. But there is one free lunch. There's only one free lunch that exists in the world, and it's a miracle that it exists. And this free lunch is a free commercial interaction between two people. So, for example, if you sell me that bottle of water and I give you 10 Rand for it, both of us are better off, right? And the reason both of us are better off is because you said, this bottle of water is actually worth less than 10 Rand for me. That's why I'm willing to give it up to John. Mm-hmm. And I say, this 10 Rand which I've got in mind is actually worth less to me than that bottle of water. That's why I'm giving it to you. Both of us are better off. And so we're creating this value, this little increment of value out of thin air that wasn't there before, just through this action of interchanging between the two of us freely because we choose to. We are creating that value out of nothing. Neither of us loses, we both gain from it. If this is repeated 1,000-fold across an economy or 1,000,000-fold across an economy, the more often this happens, the bigger the economy gets because it is creating value out of nothing. And that is the secret that underlies the success of successful societies and economies everywhere. Now, there's a consequence, so there's a sort of a corollary to that, which is that if you restrict the ability of people to do this, then you are reducing the value that the economy generates. Right? So if now a government...
That's not philosophical, that's just abstract.
Yes.
Because you haven't even provided historical examples.
Yes.
Let's go to this history of capitalism
Yeah.
a bit.
So let's just go back.
You're making a case
Yes.
for the conditions that must always be sustained for free enterprise.
I want to come back to the restrictions there.
Okay.
Right? So if the government passes a law that says that black people and white people are not allowed to engage in commercial transactions, for example, you're not allowed to sell that water to me, you are restricting the value that this economy can generate. And every restriction that a government imposes on the ability of people to interact on that basis reduces the value in that economy. So it's harmful.
John,
Yeah.
that's not so classical economics.
It is.
You know, Adam Smith,
Yes.
he's the free market guy. He wrote his Wealth
OG.
of Nations. He's the OG.
Yes.
Even for Karl Marx,
Yes.
he's the OG.
Yes.
Thomas Piketty writes, Ha-Joon Cheng writes,
Yeah.
history, economic history,
Yeah.
not the way Adam Smith does.
Yeah.
But they say, okay, we are now sitting in the 21st century. Let's look at all the countries, the big countries, the big capitalist countries. How did they become rich? And you know what they discover? One, a lot of protectionism. At some point, and Thomas Piketty takes a few examples, and I'll take three. He says, in the 1600s, China, the Persian Empire, the Ottoman, a little bit of India, were relatively even more developed than some European countries. They had a better, in the name or on the terms of classical liberal economic prediction, they had a far better chance. They had more free markets, a lean state, no tariffs, low taxes. They calculate they even compare a tax in China under the dynasty. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but that dynasty versus, for instance, in France and the UK. And they show you that the taxes were much lower. And they say the perfect example for who must succeed in the next 200 years must be China versus the UK and France. And three things, maybe more, that he isolates. One, slavery. Two, colonization. And three, internal state fights in Europe. Europe becomes the most military, security, unstable area in the world.
Yeah.
And what that does to them is that they increase the power of their states because they have to fight wars. Taxes are high. They also have to fight trade wars at an international scale to compete over access to textiles and the resources that bring about textiles. So they do a lot of protectionism. In some instances, the UK imposed as high a textile tariff as 100%. And these economies, in the short run, you think they are hurting. I mean, you look at all the data, you think, no, but what they did is that in the meantime, what happened was a development of infant industries, the capacity not to be dependent. But it also gave them a lot of military capacity, military power to be able to dominate elsewhere, whereas China had a less state, less articulation in relation to its public service. When attacked, he even gives you the numbers of the soldiers with the two ages. 100 years later, Britain has 5 times the army of the Chinese, and they were able to dominate the world. And what's the lesson? The lesson is, no, at first, liberal classical economics doesn't work. It only works after you develop industry. Then you open it up. Then you do low taxes. Then you do lean state. But in the beginning, if you have to develop, they couldn't find a single example that exhumed itself from underdevelopment, from backwardness, without betraying the laws of Adam Smith.
So, I mean, I'm not familiar with the work of Piketty except through secondary sources. But I would ask what would have happened if they had not introduced the protectionist rules that they had. So if the Europeans, for example, had not embraced colonialism, but rather engaged in free trade with the rest of the world, then what would have happened?
They wouldn't have become Europe. They wouldn't have been rich. That's the point.
Well, I'm not sure if that's true.
But that's their point. Their richness is massive amounts of free labor, which they pay through an exchange. He actually calculates what paid for the sustenance of the slaves. It came even at a cost that was transferred to other markets. That's the first thing. The second thing, massive access to mineral resources because of colonization. Massive access, uninterrupted because of war. And that's mineral resources. That's what makes them rich. The gold of South Africa is in London.
Well, so why is Switzerland rich?
Same. I actually looked at it.
Okay.
Switzerland, at the beginning of its industrialization, high tariffs, protectionist industry, particularly the basic stuff, agriculture for food security, textile. They actually demonstrate even the move from how Europe is deforested, because for early industrialization, they were depending on wood. Then they went to coal. Then they went to electricity as we know it today, nuclear and all of that. But they demonstrate, even Switzerland, for about 60 years of its developmental miracle, so to speak, it engaged in protection of infant industries, particularly where they had the advantage, but also where they felt it's their pride. Only when they were developed, they open up and say, come compete. It's like your child. You don't take your child to the labor market at 4 years. They will be obliterated. They might be poor for the rest of their lives. You develop them because they must learn how to write. They must learn how to calculate. Then they must learn how critical thinking skills. And so then you release them to competition in order to survive on their own. That's the logic of capitalism. The first 300 years of Western capitalism engaged in massive protected development that they later, in the 20th century in the main, said, nah, we're ready now. And the last one relates to post-war Europe. Post-war Europe, Thatcher disrupts state-led economic development and recovery.
Yeah. And I mean, Britain was the sick man of Europe in the 1970s.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. It was in very bad shape. So thank God Thatcher came.
But I'm saying the institutions were so developed that they could be exposed to free market competition.
You see what you need to tease apart there, though, I think, is the effects of industrialization and the Enlightenment in Europe and the effect that had on the economy of those places, which I think outweighed the effects of protectionism. But I don't know the facts on that, so, I speculate.
I see a second episode.
Yes, I think there must be. There must be one. Once I've caught up on my reading. Yes, then we'll have a second.
But I really need this example that you can give me, because the entire argument is based initially with what you call philosophy. But what is the historical example for a country as devastated as South Africa? I mean, let's take something as well as devastated as, say, post-war Europe. And everybody agreed that only the state could borrow from the future to revive the rail network. Only the state could go on a massive scale to build enough infrastructure for free enterprise to take place. No capitalist could do that.
So, I mean, we're sort of mixing a few different topics here now. So I'm not advocating for the complete withdrawal of the state from society or the economy.
Okay.
That's not what I'm saying. And that's, I think, because my abstract elaborations sort of got a bit derailed there at the beginning. So I would still like to get to the point of property rights and the rule of law, for example, which I think are also factors that are necessary for successful economy. And what it effectively means is that for you and me to engage in our exchange, we might engage in violence to do this. Like I might steal that water from you.
Oh, yes.
And there, the state does play a role to say, okay, you're actually not allowed to steal from another person. If this water belongs to you, you get to keep it. There's a property right that you own. It's your water, you decide what to do with it. And if I come and I take it away from you, I, as the state, I'm going to step in and say, you can't do that.
The ANC is with you on this one.
On property rights.
And rule of law. They had a Bill of Rights, the African Bill of Rights, before the Race Institute was formed.
Yeah,
the Africans, that ANC with Africans only, already spoke about the rule of law, already spoke about individual private property. They were more passionate, if you remember, because they had the state, the colonial state that could confiscate property from them.
Yeah.
This is ANC. This is downright ANC.
But I think that the ANC is moving away from protection of property rights. And
in what way?
And that's one of the reasons why the economy is doing so poorly. So to get to the more concrete,
yes,
there is the most important number in South Africa, I call it, is 15%. 15% is the most important number in South Africa. And 15% is something called the rate of gross fixed capital formation in South Africa. And it's a number that expresses as a share of GDP, how much money gets invested in fixed assets, which is things like railways, like roads, like factories, like machinery, equipment, that sort of thing. The global average for that number is 26, and South Africa is at 15. Emerging markets...
In the first age, where was it?
It was still too low.
But it was at 22%.
That was the highest point, the highest point.
In the first stage. That's still the ANC.
It was actually right on the cusp. It was in 2008. It was 22%.
Yes.
And I think it was part...
Do you know where I read that from?
Where?
From you.
Then it must be true. Yes, no, it is true. It is true.
And this thing about the first age, it seems your argument needs the first stage.
Yes. And one of the reasons why...
And the first stage... Well, is the ANC, is this party,
yes,
you say is socialist, disrespect individual property rights. You didn't say individuals, but property rights.
Property rights, yeah.
And doesn't do the rule of law. I'm not sure. Let me hear.
And I think, I still sort of sustain that argument.
Okay.
And the reason I say this is that if we want South Africa's growth rate to go up so that jobs are created and people's incomes can go up, then that rate of fixed capital formation has to go up. Okay. Right? So 15% is too low. Why is it so low? Like, why are we not getting more investment in infrastructure, in factories, in machines and so on? And I think the reason for that is that investors don't trust the investment environment. They look at South Africa and they say, look, you had those riots in July 2021. If I build a factory, it could get burnt down. So I'm a bit worried about that.
But that's late in the age. 2021 is what?
Yeah.
That's 9 years after...
Let me continue. So,
okay.
The investor looks at South Africa and says, you've got a very high crime rate. Right? Lots of stuff gets stolen, lots of assets get stripped, lots of people get murdered. So, if I'm an investor and I'm doing well and I look a bit wealthy, I might get murdered. I'm very scared of that. And so investors are holding back. They're keeping their money out of South Africa. And I think that's true both of South African investors and foreign investors. Both of them are saying, we don't feel comfortable with this investment environment. We're not going to put money there. And that's the problem.
I find this very difficult, John, with the IRR, its commitment to fact-based advancement of things. Why don't you put the resources of your research into the mind of the investor? And I'll tell you why. If you were to compare South Africa, say, to a country you think there is more of this fixed investment. Maybe, I think you might pick up India, or you might pick up Brazil, maybe Mexico, and you look at the same characteristics and features. Still countries with not just high crime, but brutal crime.
Yeah.
And massive corruption. Brazil, come on.
Yeah.
The variables that you are pointing out in South Africa may exist in areas, and in those areas you find there is fixed investment. And then the second one is Johan Rupert. He was asked this question. When Johan Rupert made estimations of the first age, he had this to say. He's like, President Mbeki got it right. it was too good and we didn't believe it. He said this in his interview with Given Mkari on the chairman's concession. He's like, we didn't take our luck. I mean, he doesn't follow up, obviously, Mkari, to say, but why? Why? Because you understand this. You are a South African. You want to live here. You want to make this place better. And the last part, President Mbeki likes testifying when it comes to this question. His evidence is he put investors in a table, foreign investors, and said to them in one day, he didn't call this meetings and get pledges.
Yes.
He was saying to them, you now tell us, we've gotten inflation targeting right. We've got economic growth right. We've got proper institutions. SARS is working at its best. Transnet was working at its best. And so what are we getting wrong? Why are you not investing? And their explanation was, when you look at the profile of South Africa as an international investor, South Africa's capital, they put a lot of money in the bank. They don't invest in this fixed capital you are speaking about. So as an investor from New York, why would I do that when South Africa's rich people don't do it? That was their explanation. But there's something more there. Why don't we try? Why are you not asking that question as opposed to just assuming crime is to blame?
Well,
That's what the investor is scared of. That's what the investor is thinking, the July 2100. Why don't you ask the investor?
we do.
And I've never seen that research.
Well, like the first point you mentioned is that most investors don't want to speak on the record. And this is true of many South African corporates as well, where I think that their public statements contradict what they say in private. But what we do here in private is that crime is one big concern, and the policy and legislative environment is another one. And if you take things like the Expropriation Act, for example, and the drive for expropriation without compensation, that worried a lot of investors. So that the cancellation of the bilateral investment treaties, that also worried a lot of investors. They feel uncomfortable with the environment, and they compare. They might say Mexico, if I'm an American investor, it's a bit closer. It's also like dangerous, but I feel like I can handle the risk.
Is there a possibility, though, since they are not studyable, is there a possibility that majority of South African investors are white people? That there could be an existential distrust in black leadership? And maybe the second age just made it worse. But from the beginning, they didn't trust. They had, since they were produced by a racist society, I can't put this past them.
Yeah.
Maybe they did not trust that a black leadership, on the one hand, could deliver. But the second point, which I want you to get into now, the second scary thing that your writings always evoke is the National Democratic Revolution or socialism. Many people said, they were scared the ANC is going to be doing huge socialist rollout, a plan economy, and all of that, which, but again, it has to do with the fact of distrust. Because on paper, the ANC was not a socialist party. It was these things you are speaking about.
So I think to your first question, I don't think that's true. It's possible that it is true. I hope it's not. It would be very terrible if it were true. But I guess it is possible. It could be. I do think that investors are mainly motivated by wanting to make a profit. And I think if they see a chance to make a profit, then they invest. And I think, that's where the racism argument hopefully doesn't apply. And if you give an investor a compelling case, then they should invest and they should say, like, they actually care about the skin color of the person running the place. That shouldn't matter.
What is the rate of capital fixed investment in Ethiopia or Kenya?
Don't know. I don't know what.
Or would you consider South Africa relatively more stable than Kenya?
I think that Kenya is attracting investment now that should be going to South Africa, and it may be that it is seen as more stable.
But is it? But objectively, is it a more stable national project than Ethiopia?
Yeah, I mean, like what are...
Is Ethiopia more stable than South Africa?
Well, yes, it's not. I don't think Ethiopia is.
And yet they've got a sustained growth. I suspect that they've got more capital investment. I mean, the Chinese
Yeah.
are throwing a lot of capital fixed investment in East Africa,
Yeah.
which is a point you make when you evaluate trade tariffs talks with Americans and South Africa. But please complete your point, and I would like to get your thoughts on why is the ANC, in your determination, why is NDR socialist? Every socialist would disagree with that.
Well, I think it's explicit in the NDR, right? Even in the, I think it was in the summary of remarks after the last NEC, the August NEC, the ANC affirmed that the route to a socialist future for South Africa was through the National Democratic Revolution, led by the National Liberation Movement. And it may be that this is only lip service, and maybe it's not. But certainly I think investors feel uncomfortable with it. And I also think...
What do you think socialism is then? That is so scary to investors.
I think that socialism is not really a form of economic organization that is compatible with private property rights and free economic exchange.
But does the ANC, when it articulates its economic strategy, depart from a mixed economy where there is massive private participation? Does it depart from elimination or guarantee of property rights? Where is that?
Well, so I think one of the things is that under communism, the state controls the means of production. And I don't think that is true of the ANC.
So we're getting a territory where I've got literary advantage.
Yes.
Literature advantage.
Yes.
But I want to know, let's stick to the pragmatisms. I will put it to you, at no stage in the history of the ANC did it ever articulate itself as a socialist party. It has a socialist partner, which is the SACP. But the NDR is a national democratic stage in which the ANC is the leader. And the ANC is pursuing, in that stage, a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic society. And democratic is important.
That is very important.
Because of colonization and apartheid, there were non-democratic projects. That it must become a non-racial society is important. To this non-racialism are two factors. It is against tribalism. We must not organize this place on the basis of tribes or ethnicities. We must have a national identity. Secondly, we must not organize it on the basis of the color of the skin. The ANC is responsible for that stage. Its economic statement, in the main, until, say, 1996, because it's in the state now, we don't have to speculate anymore. But until 96, or maybe even some people might say 94, is the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter is by definition not a socialist program. It is definitively a mixed economic program, something that looks like China.
Is China not a communist country?
Would you say that?
Or a socialist?
I'll be very worried, because then...
Like, I mean, they've got a communist
Then socialist, then I don't think... I think we must read Marx together. Because that's so... Come on, China, they say socialism with Chinese characteristics.
They do.
I mean, they run the biggest free enterprises in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what it is. But
There's no planned economy in China. There's no elimination of commodity production.
Yeah, and I mean, they had like the transition since 1979.
Yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping, the credit of modern China, actually references Lenin's new economic plan of the late 1920s.
Yeah, 1920s.
The new economic plan was a retreat.
Yeah, but a temporary one.
Where
yes,
a mixed economy.
Yes,
but that's the ANC will never say it's going to lead socialism. It will always say socialism belongs to the SACP. Itself, it's a nationalist party engaged in the struggle to disarticulate tribalism and racism in a Pan-Africanist way, a proper progressive Pan-Africanism, and in the interest of the further development of the continent and the peoples of African descent across the world. They must never be treated as not full citizens of the universe, wherever they are. And for them to be respected with dignity wherever they are, we've got to get the African project correct.
Yeah. So I mean, that sort of takes...
That would be, I'm not ANC.
Yes.
But if I was,
yes,
that's how I was before.
Yes.
But that's how we would sell the ANC.
Yes.
That's how you sell a national democratic project. It's not socialist.
But why is the economy not growing?
This is my point. Earlier, you just started saying China is socialist. What is the rate of capital fixed investment in China?
Yeah, I mean, like, it gets a bit complicated. My first observation is the following.
Yeah.
The less socialist and communist China was, the more successful it became.
The massive state
Right.
involvement of China. And the second thing about China,
Yes.
it's not the democratic liberal ideal that we enjoy here.
No, it's not, no. No, and it's not a model.
That place,
Yes.
by liberal standards,
Yes.
shouldn't be successful.
Yes.
Why is it successful?
Well, I think it is successful to the extent that it departed from the tenets of socialism and communism. So as soon as, from 1979,
So you agree it is not socialist?
I think it's like state-controlled. There's a lot of state control in China. But I certainly think it's embraced many of the principles of capitalism. And I think the successes that China has celebrated since 1979, since the early 1980s, are a result of the features of capitalism which it has embraced. So, it was sort of the...
And yet with a government that is...
Yeah.
You call it a dictatorship.
It is
You called it that in the US.
It is a very controlling government, certainly, yeah.
So a dictatorship, but with free market tenants.
Yeah. And I mean, the Pinochet dictatorship also had free market tenants.
Well, we must both not be
Chile
lazy.
also grew,
We
right?
must both not be lazy here. What is China? Why is that model of massive state control, largely non-democratic, at least by comparison to our constitutional praxis and the praxis of the liberal economies you celebrate?
Yeah.
Then why is the economy right there?
Yeah.
It's something about capitalism that seems to adapt.
Yeah, exactly. So if you enable people to engage in this commercial interchange, then you enable the economy to grow. And I think that's all that China did. That's the bit that's working, right? To the extent that there are private property rights in China, I think that's what...
So why would a capitalist go to China when they've got a liberal constitution in South Africa, a commitment to... everything good about liberals.
Yeah, that's a great question.
And gear.
Yeah.
And not just gear, the national development plan. Why would a capitalist go to a repressive regime?
Yeah. I think partly because it's a huge consumer market that's impossible to ignore. You've got to take note of it. Plus the very high economic growth rates. Right. So if South Africa was growing at 10% per annum, investors would be flocking here, and they would sort of drive up the growth rate further. But I think if you're in a stagnating economy with sub 1% growth and 33%...
So there's something about economics that maybe you and I need to understand, because that's belated. Why is capitalism working there under those conditions, the conditions of which you say here we shouldn't adopt?
Well, I think the bits of capitalism that are working in China are the bits that we should adopt. I don't think that the forms of state control and party control are the bits that we should adopt.
The best of China's capacity to fast-track moving 800 million people out of poverty is because of state-supported, state-subsidized agrarian reform. When they moved, for instance, from collectivization, they gave them individual properties and they supported them.
Yeah.
Not only did they subsidize them, the state bought from them for its hospitals, for its prisons, for it's a deliberate state-led program.
But people
where the consumer is actually the state.
But yes, but at least the people producing the value were able to keep some of that surplus for themselves, right? Which was the thing that they weren't able to do prior to 1979.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is where this commercial motivation came from.
I agree.
The same with the new economic policy in the Soviet Union, where the farmers were able to keep some of what they earned basically for themselves, and so they worked harder. That's basically it. And I think that's the same in China as well. We must not neglect the special economic zones in China either, where the development sort of was triggered by the freeing of the economies along the coastal zones, and that is where the growth really started. So effectively, where capitalism was strongest was where growth was highest. And I think that then drew in a lot of the rest of the country and allowed these 800 million people to be lifted out of poverty. There probably wasn't a different way to do that, except to do it through that way.
But there was a lot of capital investment from the state. I mean, they took massive risks. They took massive risks with one of the most brilliant, I think, development finance models in capitalist history.
Well, I mean, here's some great points. So the first one is that when we look at our 15% most important number, gross fixed capital formation rate, that's actually made up of two parts. About 2/3 of that, or 10 percentage points, is the private sector. So that's too low. And 5 percentage points is the public sector, and that's also too low.
Are you able to put that in real terms?
You like in rands?
Yeah.
I don't know how many rands that is.
But it's 15% of GDP.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
5% is public investment.
Yes.
And 10% is private sector.
Yes. And both parts are too low, right? So I was talking about the private sector not investing.
True.
That's a problem. But the public sector also is not investing. That's also a problem.
Do you know what was that in the first age when it was 22%? What was the division?
I don't know. But I have this very strong suspicion that one reason that we reached this record in 2008 was because of the Soccer World Cup. Right? So we were building stadiums and upgrading the highways and building trains, and all of that was reflected in that public investment figure. And so that works. So this is where we'll sort of move away from the libertarian notion that we don't want a state, the state must just go away.
I think you better adjust completely mixed economy. Don't go too liberal. You go too liberal, you might end up with enclaves.
Yeah.
If you go too liberal, you won't have anybody with the monopolized means of violence to enforce rule of law. That wherever you are in the country, if you sought to violate even a traffic fine, we will find you.
Yes. And instead what you get is localized law enforcement and localized monopolies of violence in the enclave society. That's the risk.
So you need the state.
So like this public investment, I think that's one useful role that the state can play, right? So if the state does build railways and ports and harbors and electricity power stations, that's useful, because that helps to produce economic growth. But in South Africa, there's a number called the fiscal multiplier, which measures for each rand that the state takes in the form of tax out of the economy and then spends again into the economy, how much GDP additional does it generate?
Jesus.
Okay.
When it's out, where is it? Back to the economy.
Yeah, so say the state takes 1,000 rand of taxes from people, and then it says we're going to build a railway. So we're going to take that 1,000 rand, we'll put it into the economy.
A social grant, yeah.
Well, let's rather use the railway because we want that investment to make the economy bigger, right? So afterwards, the entire economy must be bigger. But in South Africa, that doesn't work. So when our state takes money and it spends it, it's not generating an economic surplus.
But do they?
No.
Have you looked at... Because I was saying earlier, something that doesn't make sense about the second age for me. There is more spending on public infrastructure than the first age in trillions. But you don't see that infrastructure.
Yes. So I think overall spending is certainly higher. And Gabriel Krause, whom we mentioned before the show, produced a very clever graph, I think. And what it does, it shows from 1996 to 2022, I think was the latest information he had, 2 lines. And the one line shows the size of the state as a share of GDP, as expressed through the state spending. And that line goes up. Right? So state spending as a share of the economy has been increasing since 1996. That's the first line. The second line measures the quality of state performance. And that line goes down. And the consequence is that we may be spending more money. The state is spending more money, but we're getting worse results as a consequence. And that's a problem, right? Because it means value destruction in the economy. And that also, I think...
What could they be doing with it?
Well, what could they possibly be doing, I wonder?
Because that's a huge financial muscle. The budget, the fiscal procurement, state procurement in certain countries plays wonders as a serious growth multiplier.
Yes.
It's not doing that
Correct.
here. And you can't just reduce it, I suppose. I mean, maybe you will. I don't know what's your explanation, but you can't say, it's because of BEE.
Well, now, that brings us to a great point, which is this. Currently, under South African law, the state is entitled to overspend in public procurement. It is allowed to spend more than it needs to. Right?
Most countries do that.
Because there's a preferential procurement. Right.
Yeah, they say, look, we're going to protect Ford.
Now, this is not that kind of spending.
Yeah, well, but it's preferential.
Yeah,
The state says, we are only going to buy from this factory the cars that the state procures. For 20 years, it's not making any single profit. But they know, as a Japan, we want to have our own car.
yeah.
40 years later, there's no village in the world without Toyota. After 20 years of wasteful procurement,
Well,
which was preferential.
Well, let me go sort of one step back. And let us imagine a situation where there's a village and there's a little dirt road that leads to the main road. And that dirt road is 10 kilometers long. And the government says, wouldn't it be good if we tarred that road? Because then the villagers would be able to get to the main road and to places of work more easily, to the schools more easily, and whatever they're manufacturing. They can sell more easily in the markets if they can get through that main road. What a great idea. Let's tar that road. So they put out a tender and say, who can do this work for us? Here's how much money we've got available. They get various bids, and they give it to a black-owned company that is able to overcharge by design. That's what the Preferential Procurement Act allows. Right?
It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to, but it can. So it can get the bid even though it's charging more than other companies.
If there are five companies
let me just finish.
and only one is black and it's offering the highest of the rest,
Price.
the state has the right to go to this one.
Yes.
And that's the premium you're speaking about.
Yes.
Okay, agreed.
And the consequence of this is that if the budget does not increase for the paving of the road, then not all of the 10 kilometers will be paved.
That is so reductionist.
Well, this is what happens, right? So
Come on.
this is what happens in South Africa.
Come on. I mean, I can't defend BEE, let me tell you, not in its current form.
Well,
because,
I came here expecting you to defend it, but
no, we have to build state capacity to deliver services. I believe BEE has to be preferential, but it has to be targeted in certain sectors. I think that there are sectors that we say we need to build, because the BEE idea is about the economy must not be white, owned. When we look at the profile of the owners of the economy, there must be a deliberate purpose, deliberate program by the state to make it representative of the demographics of South Africa. And the state has this muscle called procurement.
yes.
And I think that certainly not on a road, man. I mean, municipal workers should build the roads. That's prime. But there are infant industries that you want to develop, that you want to build, that you can gain competitive advantage on, that are important for your sovereignty, that are important for you not to be dependent. In those areas, I think you must have preferential spending or preferential procurement. You start with South Africans, you go to South Africans regardless of their race, you go, and then women, people with disabilities, because these people, because of our social conditions, our cultural conditions, don't live in the same rooms. By and large, they are not in the same social circles where real business is being made. So you sort of create the conditions for them to speak to each other about business and to have the capacity to do these deals. I don't see anything wrong. Everybody does that in the world. They do preferential procurement. It might not be on the basis of race, but it may be, for instance, to develop a specific industry, and they give it time. They will go for 20 years. Americans have been protecting their agricultural produce for as long as that economy existed. Because if they were to open that market, they cannot compete with the world.
Yeah, and that's where I disagree with the protectionism. I don't think they should be doing that. But coming back to the preferential procurement, in the case of that road, what will happen is that only 5 kilometers of that road get tarred, and the Black Empowerment Company benefits from that tender, but the villagers lose out because they don't get that tarred road. And that happens again and again in public procurement.
Is that because of the procurement? I don't understand.
Well,
I mean, if you get...
you're not getting value for money.
But if you get companies that do deliver the road, would you change your views?
If they're already delivering at the best price, then you don't need preferential procurement. But they're not delivering at the best price. They're overcharging. They're charging more.
Let's say they are, but they do deliver the road, and the state has an interest that in the construction sector there are black players.
Yes.
It's going to use its protection, its procurement muscle
Yes.
to develop the black bourgeoisie.
Yes, but what?
But it will do that on the basis of merit, nonetheless.
But what's the consequence?
Why should the state not be why shouldn't it take that cost?
Because you're making people worse off. Like you're harming poor people by doing that.
How? I'm not following.
Well, in the case of the road, the villagers don't get the tarred road.
We are together with you. Whoever doesn't build a road
Yes.
must be scrapped during BEE or outside BEE.
Yes.
So-
and this is what Chief Justice Zondo said, right?
No,
in the Zondo Commission report.
I don't remember. Okay.
Okay.
But
You must
I'm
remember
with you.
Page 963.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Yes.
You must be able to deliver the road.
At what cost?
I'm saying to you, why is the logic
Yes.
in and of itself, a priori,
Yeah.
you are disqualifying it a priori, that the state shouldn't bear the cost, the social cost.
It's not the state bearing the cost.
No,
it's the
it is.
recipient.
No, I'm saying if they do get a road,
Yes.
if they do get a road,
Yes.
they've gotten the road.
Yes.
You and I agree, if they can't provide the road,
Yes.
they must not get the tender.
Yes.
But if they can,
Yes.
and there are 3 companies,
Yes.
and the black players can get the road right,
At a higher price.
but at a higher price than these 2, because
Yes.
these 2 are developed.
Yes. Yes.
And in some instances, it could be international actors.
Yes.
In some instances, it's not even South African white capital.
Now look at the other side of the equation.
I'm
right?
coming to the equation.
Okay.
Why shouldn't this state, which has 300 years of deliberate disadvantage, deliberate damnification, deliberate economic exploitation of the blacks, not see it fit through its procurement capability to uplift those people?
Because it is harming other people on the other side of the equation and it's making life worse for them. That's
How if they're getting the road?
Because let's say the state says, okay, we're going to increase the budget in order to get the black-owned firm to
They
build
say
the
they
road.
don't increase the budget. They don't increase the budget.
Then-
they get the road right, but they do preferential treatment.
Tell me, is it at a... this is really important. This is really important. What's the cost of doing that, of that road?
What does it matter if it is about
It matters a lot.
addressing what you and I started by agreeing
Yeah.
was an economic machinery?
Yes.
Apartheid was an economic machinery. Colonization was worse. You know, apartheid, at least, it developed South Africa.
Well,
That's why it was called colonization of a special time. Colonization just plundered resources to Europe. It left us with the big hole, for instance, in Kimberley.
Yeah.
Nothing shows that this was the Diamond City. But if you come to Joburg, you know, there's Joburg.
Yes.
And although the gold is in London, but there's Joburg, and there's Sasol, there's Denel, there's Transnet, there's what you guys used to call Jan Smart's airport. But the point I'm making is, why should society not say, we're going to pay the cost? To say there must be black business people, because this was a deliberate disadvantage. They were not disadvantaged because they couldn't deliver roads. They were not disadvantaged because they were not smart enough. They were disadvantaged because they were told, you are children, you must just be hewers of wood.
So we have to get back to the price, right? We're sort of moving away from that.
Yeah.
The key question
this
is...
price, though, I'm going to agree with the price, because it's existing in a situation of complete useless BEE.
Yes.
But I'm defending the principle
I'll agree with you
of
on one.
preferential procurement.
Let's say there are 3 companies and they all are able to do the work to the same quality and they offer the same price, and one of those companies is black-owned. I think in the case of a tiebreaker, it is justifiable to say this work should be awarded to the black-owned company. But I do not think it is justifiable if overpricing is justified. And the reason for this is that it diminishes the budget for the state doing helpful things for people who need it more than that black-owned
What if
company.
you can do all of them?
Well, it can't. Like limited resources
No,
are
but it
limited.
can.
No.
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
Most governments pay the price. Your hypothetical abstract philosophy,
Yeah.
there is a price that you must always pay. Sometimes that price, John, is not immediate.
Yes, that's true.
Sometimes the things that we want need us to sacrifice for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Because they take 20 years to correct, or they take 20 years to develop.
Yes.
And in this case, as a principle, because majority of us, free-thinking people, will agree with you that there are instances in our economy that BEE has not made sense, or preferential procurement. By that logic, in my view, even if you were to remove preferential procurement, corruption is corruption.
Yeah, that's another issue.
There's
Yeah,
no
sure.
preferential procurement in many parts of the world. You still see
Well, public procurement is always,
a parasitic bourgeoisie. We're going to agree with you. But what we don't agree is that that parasitic relationship is caused by this historical duty that the state must, in the immediate, it's costly. But it's like a guy that gives the more recent fourth industrial revolutionary capitalists call themselves not venture capitalists, the Silicon Valley people. There's a model, there's a terminology which I forget that they call themselves. But basically, they can make you money they can accelerate capital in a huge way. Like you give them, but you have to give them enough. I mean, if you invest in Facebook,
Yes.
Facebook needed, let's say, $300 billion. And in 4 years, they give you $1 trillion. Just hypothetical example. Or $300 million, and then in 4 years, they give you $5 billion.
Yes.
It's a capital model. Most banks don't take that risk. Most banks, when all those digital new companies were starting in Silicon Valley, they had a problem with traditional models of financing. Big banks were like, it's too risky. Where is the business plan? What is it based on? But and that's another example of capital evolving. We've never seen that before. Companies that capitalize with that much speed, like Amazon, like Facebook, like TikTok, for an example. So, but in some instances, those people will tell you the risk will be covered, but later. So you give 5 people R1 billion each. These ones fall because they are not successful, but this one makes you 100 billion. You have recovered your money.
Yeah. And in the case of South Africa, I would say that our policies, like the effects of the policies, are now becoming visible. And I think they are visible in no growth and high unemployment. And that is why we say, we've got to try something different. We've got a problem. We've got a serious problem here.
But why is that thing that is different not a different model of BEE rather than BEE? This obligation to correct an injustice of the past is in and of itself wrong.
So one counter to that would be to say that you could say there are soggy non-racialists and crunchy non-racialists.
Okay.
And a soggy non-racialist will say, we kind of want to be non-racial, but we do have to racially discriminate in order to get there, right? And that's
racially what do you prefer?
For example, yes, yeah. And
out of every 6 or 7 deals, 8 deals we make, out of every 10 deals we make, 8 must be with the deliberate intention to create a black businessman.
Yes. And a crunchy non-racialist says, just don't do that. Like if your goal is to advance people who are poor, then focus on that. Do that. There's ways to do that. And that is what you should be focusing on.
You must create business.
Yes, you have to create
business. People have to be created.
Yes.
And so there's a poverty question. I agree with you.
Yes, but
you have to create an industrialist.
Yes, but the state...
And that always... I don't know a model in the world in which that doesn't come with a long-term plan, where there is a sacrifice.
Yeah, and I think like the state has a role to play in that, but I don't think the state should be creating the industrialist.
Why not? All states do.
Really?
Of course.
Okay. Like some examples here locally?
In South Africa, Naspers was created by the state.
Okay. What about Capitec?
Capitec, two things that are important about Capitec from a pure capitalist point of view.
Yes.
And its CEO likes to say this. The biggest beneficiary, its most important client, is the client that receives a social grant.
Yeah, and that's probably also true of ShopRite. But I mean, they weren't created by the government, and nor was Discovery, for example. So I think, that's private initiative operating in a certain environment.
But they do a lot of business with the state.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a way of creating where I deliberately say, I'm going to give you capital. But the state creates capitalists by preferential procurement, that it deliberately makes business with you. Instead of going to bank in America, it banks with Standard Bank.
Yeah.
And that makes Standard Bank functional. That's why Standard Bank, if all the accounts of the state were to withdraw from Standard Bank, it might fall in a year.
Yeah. And
There's a preference that we're going to save our money.
yeah.
We could save them elsewhere.
Yeah.
And we would get it anytime. And the international system finance is way advanced. But we are going to bank it with South African banks.
Yes.
Because as a country, it is in our best interest for dependency to have our own financial system. They need the state procurement to survive.
Yeah, but it's if the state weren't so large, then they wouldn't need it, right? But our state is like 33% of the economy.
Where in the world do banks say they don't need state bonds?
Well, no.
Where in the world?
So I mean, are you arguing for a situation where there is no state, or?
I'm saying to you, the classical liberal argument
Yes.
has a full appreciation of the role of the state in the history of capitalist development. And that role has not always been the same. It's not a size one fits all. It has to be always read on the basis of the existing conditions. As to the size of that state, the extent of its involvement or not in the productive sectors has to be read in context with the objectives that that society sets for itself. Majority of the time, and I'm saying that in well-developed countries, the new capitalists are getting their capital from capitalists that were created by doing massive businesses, either under state protection or with the state. You can't eliminate the role of the state. You've got to situate it at all material times, the extent to which it must function. And certainly in our case, I wonder that we can agree that in the third age are elements. We have to recover the elements of the first age.
Yes.
There was something right happening. There was something right that government was doing. If there's going to be this future you are speaking about, there's things we have to recover from that first stage. And one of them is an efficient but big state.
Well, I would say, I would say like an efficient state is the main thing. And I don't think it has to be a big state. I don't think it needs to be that. I think like, the question is the state a value destroyer or a value producer? And I think in South Africa, the state is a value destroyer overall. And that's part of the problem. It's like a dead weight drag on our economy.
Do you think Eskom is recovering?
In recovery, you mean? I think it is, yeah. I think
That
it is.
will give us a lot of value, no?
It will. Yeah. And I think also for electrical utilities, the state does have a big role to play because of the cost of capital. Like a state-owned entity like Eskom, if it is properly run, is able to access capital at lower rates than individual power producers would be. If we're going to be shifting to renewables, for example, and have a heap of renewable producers with variable production, I think it's going to destabilize the grid. It would probably be better to have multiple fossil fuel-based generators working towards nuclear in the future. But I worry about the transition that we're undergoing.
That's an interest. We have to agree that we got to have a second episode.
Well,
and I'll tell you, I'm interested in your foreign policy. and trade policy and this future of the energy policy. It didn't occur to me that you are on the other side, but it's a very interesting starting point, the way you've put it in relation to the future of energy in South Africa.
Because economic growth is the thing that really matters.
Yeah.
We can't get by without it. And we can't have economic growth without reliable electricity and affordable electricity. And if we're driving up the cost of power, as Eskom is doing, it also harms the economy. So I'm looking for cheap power that's reliable for our country.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you so much,
And I
Mbuyiseni.
hopefully see you next time.
Will do.
That's it from
Thank
us, Bantwana Benkosi. This is the African Renaissance Podcast. See you next time.